The hallways of Ridgefield Academy echoed with whispers as Amara Daniels walked to class, eyes forward, shoulders back, invisible by choice. 3 weeks into her senior year, and Brent Keller had already decided she didn't belong. The quiet, black girl who sat alone at lunch. His campaign started small. Accidental collisions, mocking laughter, crude drawings left on her locker. Fellow students watched with familiar indifference, placing silent bets on when she'd finally break. What they couldn't see was how Amara's fingers instinctively curled into fists before deliberately relaxing, and how she controlled her breathing when cornered. Master Elijah Daniels hadn't spent 12 years training his granddaughter in ancient techniques just for her to use them carelessly. As Brent's taunts grew bolder and his followers more vicious, no one realized they weren't testing her breaking point. They were awakening something far more dangerous. Her discipline. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The moving truck rumbled, past the weathered sign that read, "Welcome to Ridgefield," its faded letters promising a charm that Amara Daniels had yet to witness. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the passenger window, her fingers tracing the edges of an old photograph. In it, a younger version of herself stood proudly beside her grandfather, both dressed in crisp white karate gis, her tiny hand attempting to mimic his perfect bow. "We're almost there, honey," her mother said, glancing over with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Your grandfather's already got your room set up." Amara nodded silently. The move hadn't been her choice, but after what happened at her last school, options had dwindled quickly. Her mother had called it a fresh start. Amara called it running away. The truck turned onto Maple Street, where identical suburban houses lined both sides like perfect teeth. Everything looked scrubbed clean, almost unnaturally so. It was nothing like the vibrant, chaotic neighborhood they'd left behind in Atlanta. "This is it," her mother announced as they pulled into the driveway of a modest 2-story home. Standing on the porch was a tall, imposing figure, Master Elijah Daniels, her grandfather, straight-backed despite his 70 years. Amara stepped out of the truck and approached slowly. Her grandfather's face remained impassive, but his eyes softened as she came closer. "You've grown," he said simply. "It's been 3 years, Grandpa." He nodded, then turned to help with the boxes. No hugs, no emotional welcome, just the silent acknowledgement that she was here now. And that was that. Exactly what she expected from him. Ridgefield Academy loomed before Amara like a fortress, its brick facade and tall windows intimidating in their perfection. Students streamed past her in their pristine uniforms, navy blazers, plaid skirts for the girls, pressed slacks for the boys. Amara tugged at her own blazer, feeling out of place despite wearing the same attire. The main office was a flurry of activity as she approached the front desk. A woman with steel gray hair and matching disposition looked up from her computer. "Amara Daniels," Amara said before being asked. "I'm new." The woman, Mrs. Peterson according to her nameplate, assessed Amara with cool efficiency. "Yes, the transfer from Atlanta." Her gaze traveled down to Amara's skirt. "Your skirt is too long. Ridgefield Academy maintains a modern dress code." Amara glanced down at her skirt, which reached just below her knees. "I'm sorry, I thought, no matter. We'll note it for tomorrow. Here's your schedule." Mrs. Peterson handed over a printed timetable. "First period begins in 10 minutes. Don't be late." Taking the schedule, Amara nodded politely. She wasn't here to make waves. Not again. The hallways were a maze of gleaming floors and trophy cases. Students moved in tight-knit groups, conversations halting as she passed. Amara kept her gaze forward, clutching the worn book of martial arts philosophy her grandfather had given her that morning. "For when words fail you," he'd said. AP History was her first class. The teacher, Mr. Williams, barely acknowledged her entrance, merely pointing to an empty desk near the back. Amara slipped in quietly, aware of the curious eyes tracking her movement. "As I was saying," Mr. Williams continued, "the Treaty of Versailles created conditions that many historians argued directly led to the rise of fascism in Europe. Mr. Keller Perhaps you can elaborate on which specific conditions were most influential? A broad-shouldered boy with sandy hair near the front straightened. Well, I think it was the economic sanctions, and Germany had to take all the blame for the war, which made them mad. Mr. Williams sighed. Partially correct, though. Rather simplified. The treaty imposed reparation payments of 132 billion gold marks, which today would be approximately $242 billion, Amara said quietly, her voice still somehow carrying through the room. Article 231, the War Guilt Clause, was particularly resented because it forced Germany to accept sole responsibility for the war. The classroom fell silent. Mr. Williams blinked in surprise. That's correct, Miss Daniels. I see you've done your reading. The sandy-haired boy, Brent Keller, according to the whispers that followed, turned to glare at her. His eyes narrowed, jaw clenched. Amara looked down at her book, already regretting speaking up. She'd promised herself she would keep her head down. Yet here she was, drawing attention on her very first day. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of new faces and unfamiliar routines. By lunchtime, Amara's resolve to remain invisible was already cracking under the weight of curious stares and whispered comments. The cafeteria was a carefully segregated ecosystem. Athletes occupied the center tables. Theater kids claimed the area near the stage door. Honor students huddled near the windows. Amara found an empty table in the corner and sat alone, unpacking the lunch her grandfather had prepared, a simple bento box with rice, vegetables, and grilled chicken. From across the room, she noticed a girl with dark curly hair watching her. Unlike the others, her gaze seemed curious rather than judgmental. Their eyes met briefly before the girl looked away, returning to her conversation with friends. Amara ate methodically, her mind drifting to her grandfather's words that morning. "Remember why you're here," he'd said while driving her to school. "Not to impress them, not to win them over, to learn, to grow, to find your center again." Her thoughts were interrupted by a commotion at the cafeteria entrance. Brent Keller strode in with a group of similarly built boys, all wearing the same navy blazers but somehow making them look like uniforms of authority rather than conformity. They slapped backs, exchanged complicated handshakes, and tossed out jokes that carried just enough edge to make others uncomfortable. "Yo, Jackson, that new history teacher with the accent. Bet she can't even understand what you're saying, man," Brent called out, his voice carrying deliberately across the room. A black boy at a nearby table shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Others laughed nervously. "What did you say her name was? Miss Cho, Miss Chow?" "Whatever, all sounds the same," Brent continued, looking around for approval. A teacher walking past seemed to hesitate, then continued on his way without comment. The display of power was complete. Brent Keller had shown he could say whatever he wanted without consequence. Amara kept her eyes on her food, but she could feel Brent's attention shift momentarily in her direction before moving on. A clear message had been sent to everyone in the room, including her. This was his territory. That evening, in the quiet of her new bedroom, Amara closed her eyes and breathed deeply. The familiar scent of sandalwood incense helped center her thoughts as she moved through the kata her grandfather had taught her years ago. Each movement was precise, controlled, a dance of potential energy never fully released. In her mind, she was 8 years old again, sparring with her grandfather in his backyard dojo. She'd landed a solid kick, and her small face had lit up with pride. "Good," Elijah had said, his voice stern even in praise. "But remember, control. You don't fight to win, you fight to protect." "What if I need to protect myself?" young Amara had asked. "Then you protect yourself with the least amount of force necessary. Always." The memory faded as Amara completed the kata, opening her eyes to find her grandfather standing in the doorway. He watched her silently, his expression unreadable. Then, with the slightest nod of approval, he closed the door, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Amara sank onto her bed, staring at the ceiling. One day down. Just 100 more to go until graduation. The second day at Ridgefield Academy began, much like the first, with curious stares and whispered comments. Amara had shortened her skirt slightly, just enough to avoid another comment from Mrs. Peterson. She navigated the hallways with practiced calm, keeping her eyes forward and her expression neutral. By lunchtime, she'd almost convinced herself that she might blend in after all. Then she entered the cafeteria. Amara balanced her tray carefully as she walked toward the same corner table she'd claimed yesterday. She didn't see the foot extended in her path until it was too late. Her ankle caught, sending her stumbling forward. The tray tilted, then crashed to the floor, spattering food across the polished tiles and the hem of her skirt. Laughter erupted from a nearby table where one of Brent's friends, Tyler Wilson according to the varsity jacket he wore, sat with a satisfied smirk. "Oops," he said loudly. "Didn't see you there." Amara stood perfectly still for 3 heartbeats. Then, without a word, she knelt and began gathering the scattered food onto her tray. Her movements were methodical, her face expressionless. From me. Across the room, the same curly-haired girl from yesterday watched, her brow furrowed. Something about Amara's composed response seemed to unsettle her more than the prank itself. Once the mess was cleaned, Amara discarded the ruined lunch and walked calmly to her table. She sat down, opened her book, and began to read as if nothing had happened. Inside, her heart hammered against her ribs, but years of training had taught her to separate inner turmoil from outer demeanor. "Did you see that?" Maya Thompson whispered to her friend Zoe. She didn't even react, not even a little. Zoe shrugged. "Weird girl. I heard she got kicked out of her last school for fighting." Maya frowned, still watching Amara. "I don't know. Doesn't seem like someone with a temper." English class brought a new challenge. Mrs. Baker, a petite woman with enthusiastic hand gestures, announced a partner exercise. "Today we're doing impromptu interviews. Get to know your classmates better while practicing journalistic questioning. I'll assign partners." Amara's stomach tightened as Mrs. Baker read through the list. When she heard her name paired with Brent Keller, she kept her expression carefully neutral despite the sudden chill that ran down her spine. Chairs scraped across the floor as students rearranged themselves. Brent sauntered over, dragging his chair with deliberate slowness before dropping into it across from Amara. "So," he drawled, notebook open, but pen untouched. Amara, she corrected quietly. "Amara," he repeated, emphasizing each syllable incorrectly. "That's what I said. So, Amora, what brings you to our humble school? Get kicked out of your last one?" Amara met his gaze steadily. "Family reasons." "Right. Family reasons." He made a show of writing something down. "And what does your family do, besides karate chops?" He made a chopping motion with his hand accompanied by a stereotypical hi-ya sound. Several nearby students snickered. Amara remained still. "My mother is a nurse. My grandfather is retired." "Retired from what? Kung fu movies?" More snickers. "He taught martial arts, yes." Brent leaned forward, his smile never reaching his eyes. "So you're what, some kind of karate kid? Black belt in butt kicking?" Amara didn't answer, simply waiting for the next question. Brent's smile faltered slightly at her lack of response. "Mrs. Baker said to ask about hobbies," she prompted after the silence stretched uncomfortably. Brent recovered quickly. "Football, wrestling, winning. You know, normal stuff. Not everyone spends their time chopping boards and saying wax on, wax off." The interview continued this way, with Brent making increasingly pointed jabs and Amara responding with minimal information. When Mrs. Baker finally called time, Amara could feel a headache forming behind her eyes from the effort of maintaining her composure. As they returned to their regular seats, Brent leaned close enough that only she could hear. "You think you're so cool and calm, don't you? We'll see how long that lasts." The following morning, Amara arrived at her locker to find a small crowd gathered nearby, poorly disguising their interest. As she approached, they dispersed, revealing what had drawn their attention. Someone had taped a crude drawing to her locker door, a stick figure in an exaggerated martial arts pose with grotesquely caricatured features. Kung Fu Barbie was scrawled across the bottom in blocky letters. Amara removed the paper without changing her expression, folded it neatly, and placed it in her bag. She opened her locker, exchanged her books, and closed it again. Only then did she notice the curly-haired girl from the cafeteria, watching her from a few lockers down. "You don't have to take that, you know," the girl said quietly. "You could report it." Amara regarded her for a moment. And what would that accomplish? The girl seemed taken aback by the question. Before she could answer, the warning bell rang, and Amara walked away, leaving her standing there with a troubled expression. Throughout the morning, Amara felt Brent's presence like a shadow. He wasn't in all her classes, but his influence was everywhere, in the whispers that followed her, in the way certain students would deliberately avoid sitting near her, in the quick glances thrown her way when teachers mentioned anything related to Asia or martial arts. During the mid-morning break, Amara found a quiet corner in the courtyard to review her notes for the next class. The space between two buildings created a small alcove with a bench, partially hidden by a large oak tree. She had just opened her notebook when a shadow fell across the pages. "Hiding out?" Brent's voice carried a false friendliness that set her nerves on edge. Amara looked up to find him standing there, flanked by Tyler and another boy she didn't recognize. She didn't respond, simply waiting. "I asked you a question," Brent said, his tone hardening. "Are you hiding from us? Scared?" "I'm studying," Amara replied evenly. "Excuse me." She moved to gather her things, but Brent stepped closer, invading her space. "You know, most new kids try to fit in, make friends. You just sit there acting all superior. What's wrong with you?" Amara stood, her movements smooth and controlled. She met Brent's gaze directly, her face composed, but her eyes cold and steady. She didn't speak, didn't move, just stared. Something in her gaze must have unsettled him because he shifted his weight backward slightly. "Whatever," he muttered, breaking eye contact first. "Freak." He and his friends turned to leave, but not before Tyler knocked her notebook to the ground with a deliberate swipe of his hand. They walked away laughing, but it sounded forced even to their own ears. Amara retrieved her notebook, dusted it off, and returned to her seat. Only when they were completely gone did she allow herself a single deep breath, releasing the tension that had built in her shoulders. The next confrontation came during the change of classes that afternoon. The hallway was crowded, students rushing to make it to their next period on time. Amara walked purposefully, weaving between groups, her books clutched to her chest. She felt someone approach from behind a split second before it happened. Brent's voice came loud enough for nearby students to hear. "Nice skirt, Kung Fu girl. Still too long, though." His hand reached for the hem of her skirt, fingers grasping the fabric in a deliberate attempt to lift it. Several girls gasped. A boy with his phone out started to raise it, anticipating a scene worth recording. What happened next occurred so quickly that later, different witnesses would describe it differently. Amara's hand shot out, catching Brent's wrist in mid-motion. Her grip was precise, applying pressure to specific points that made his fingers instantly release the fabric. Brent's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in pain as she maintained the hold for exactly 3 seconds before releasing him and stepping back. No one else had seen exactly where her fingers had pressed. To most observers, she had simply grabbed his wrist firmly. But Brent felt the difference, the calculated precision that had sent a sharp, localizing pain through his arm without leaving a mark. Amara picked up a book that had fallen in the brief exchange and continued walking as if nothing had happened. Behind her, Brent massaged his wrist, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Psycho bitch," he muttered, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. Students who witnessed the exchange began whispering immediately. By the end of the day, rumors had transformed the incident into something larger. Some said she'd nearly broken his arm. Others claimed she'd threatened him, in some foreign language. The truth, that she had simply stopped him with controlled efficiency, was less dramatic but somehow more unsettling. The incident changed how people looked at Amara. The curiosity in their glances now mixed with something new, wariness, and in some cases a grudging respect. She was no longer just the new girl. She was weird but dangerous, as one sophomore put it during study hall. That afternoon, Amara found herself in detention. though she wasn't entirely sure why. According to the slip, she had engaged in threatening behavior in the hallway. She sat at a desk near the window, completing her calculus homework while occasionally glancing outside at the empty sports field. The door opened, and to her surprise, the curly-haired girl who had spoken to her at the lockers walked in. She handed a slip to Mr. Davis, the science teacher monitoring detention, and took a seat 2 desks away from Amara. Mr. Davis sighed heavily. No talking, no phones, no leaving until 4:30. I'll be next door grading papers. The door stays open. Once he left, the girl turned slightly toward Amara. I'm Maya, she whispered. Maya Thompson. Amara glanced at her, then back at her homework. Amara Daniels. I know, Maya said with a small smile. Everyone knows now. They sat in silence for a few minutes before Maya spoke again. I got detention for being late to English 3 times this week. What about you? Amara hesitated, then replied. Apparently I threatened someone in the hallway. Maya snorted. You mean when Brent tried to pull that disgusting skirt stunt? That wasn't threatening. That was justified. Amara looked at her properly for the first time. Maya's expression seemed genuine, without the calculation she'd grown accustomed to seeing in others' faces. It doesn't matter, Amara said, returning to her homework. I shouldn't have grabbed him. Why not? He deserved it. Because it wasn't necessary. I could have stepped away. Maya studied her curiously. You're really not what people are saying, are you? What are they saying? That you're some martial arts prodigy with anger issues. That you got kicked out of your last school for putting someone in the hospital. Amara's pen paused on the page. And what do you think? Maya considered this. I think you're probably the calmest person I've ever met. And that seems to really bother certain people. A ghost of a smile touched Amara's lips before disappearing. They worked in companionable silence for the remainder of detention, speaking only occasionally about assignments and teachers. It wasn't exactly friendship, but it was the closest connection Amara had made since arriving at Ridgefield. That evening, Amara opened her locker to retrieve her history textbook before heading home. A small folded paper fell out when she opened the door. Unfolding it revealed a message in the same blocky handwriting as the caricature. You're not leaving here alive. She stared at the note for a long moment, her expression unchanged. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in her pocket. At home, Master Elijah was in the backyard, tending to the small Zen garden he'd created years ago. Amara approached, silently, the note in her hand. Grandfather, she said softly. He didn't look up from his raking. Yes? She hesitated, then tucked the note back into her pocket. Nothing. Just checking if you need help. I do not. Amara nodded and walked to the small fire pit at the edge of the garden. She lit it carefully, then removed the note and dropped it into the flames. As it curled and blackened, she watched without expression. From across the garden, Elijah observed, her silently, his rake momentarily still. Later that evening, as dusk settled over Ridgefield, Amara found herself drawn to the small wooded area behind their house. Here, away from prying eyes, she moved through a more advanced kata. Her strikes cut through the air with precision, each movement flowing into the next with controlled power. Hidden among the trees, Master Elijah watched his granddaughter, his face betraying a complex mixture of pride and concern. The control she displayed was remarkable, perhaps too remarkable for one so young. He had taught her well, perhaps too well. Now he wondered if she would ever allow herself to release what she kept so tightly bound inside. As Amara completed the kata, a twig snapped nearby. She froze, then relaxed as she recognized Kyle Murphy, one of Brent's friends, standing at the edge of the clearing. He seemed embarrassed to be caught watching. Sorry, he said quickly. I was just taking a shortcut home and… His voice trailed off. Amara said nothing, simply waiting for him to leave. That was pretty amazing, Kyle offered awkwardly. What you were doing. Thank you, she replied, her voice neutral. Kyle shifted uncomfortably. Look, about Brent and all that, it's not. He stopped, seeming unsure how to continue. Never mind. Sorry to interrupt. As he turned to leave, Amara noticed something in his expression. Doubt, perhaps, or the beginning of a question he wasn't ready to ask. He disappeared among the trees, leaving her alone once more, or so she thought. From his vantage point, Master Elijah had observed the entire exchange. The boy's presence troubled him more than he cared to admit. Amara's skill was meant to be a shield, not a spectacle, and certainly not something that would draw more unwanted attention. As darkness fell completely, he stepped from the shadows. "Come," he said simply. "Dinner is ready." Amara followed her grandfather back to the house, unaware that Kyle Murphy was still watching from a distance, his phone clutched tightly in his hand, as if he'd been considering whether to record what he'd seen but ultimately decided against it. The school day had ended hours ago, but Maya found herself drawn back to the campus. She'd forgotten her chemistry textbook, or at least that's what she told herself as she slipped through the side entrance that the janitors always left unlocked. The halls were eerily quiet, the overhead lights dimmed to their nighttime setting. As she approached her locker, a faint rhythmic sound caught her attention. Thump. Swoosh. Thump. It came from the direction of the gymnasium. Curiosity pulled her forward. The gym door was cracked open just enough to allow a sliver of light to escape. Maya peered through the gap and froze at what she saw. Amara moved across the polished floor with impossible grace, a wooden staff spinning in her hands. Her movements were fluid yet precise, the bow staff an extension of her body as she executed, a complex series of strikes, blocks, and spins. Maya had never seen anything like it. This wasn't the awkward martial arts demonstrated at local strip mall dojos. This was something else entirely, beautiful, deadly, and mesmerizing. Before she could stop herself, Maya had pulled out her phone and begun recording. The soft click of the button must have carried in the quiet gym, because Amara stopped mid-motion, her head turning directly toward the door. "Who's there?" Her voice was calm, but carried an edge Maya hadn't heard before. Maya pushed the door open, phone still recording. "Sorry, I forgot my chem book." Amara's eyes narrowed at the phone. "Turn that off." "Oh, right, sorry." Maya stopped the recording but didn't delete it. "That was amazing. Where did you learn to do that?" Amara carefully placed the bow staff on a rack against the wall. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," Maya countered. "How'd you get permission to use the gym after hours?" "I didn't." Amara gathered her water bottle and towel. "Please delete that video." Maya looked down at her phone, the thumbnail of the video showing Amara in mid-rotation. "Why? It's incredible. You're like professional level or something." "Delete it." Amara's voice remained steady, but there was no mistaking the command in it. The next morning, Maya cornered Amara at her locker. "I deleted it," she said, without preamble. "But I want to know who you are, really." Amara continued organizing her books. "You know who I am." "No, I don't." Maya leaned against the adjacent locker. "No one just moves like that without serious training, Olympic-level training, and you're treating it like some big secret." "Why?" Amara closed her locker and turned to face Maya directly. "You should delete that video permanently, not just from your camera roll, but from your recently deleted folder too." "Already did. Now answer my question." Amara studied Maya's face, searching for something. Whatever she saw made her sigh softly. "You don't want to know who I used to be." The warning bell rang, saving Amara from further questioning. As she walked away, Maya called after her. "I'm not giving up that easily." The day progressed with Maya watching Amara even more intently than before. During PE, she noticed how Amara deliberately held back during sprints, finishing solidly in the middle of the pack despite her obvious athleticism. At lunch, she observed Amara's perfect posture, the economy of movement as she ate, never wasting a gesture. Meanwhile, across the cafeteria, Brent Keller was nursing both a bruised ego and a wrist that still ached when he moved it a certain way. The girl had done something to him, something quick and precise that had sent pain shooting up his arm like an electric current. Nobody made him look like a fool, especially not some new girl who thought she was better than everyone else. That afternoon in history class, Mr. Williams played a documentary about traditional Japanese martial arts. When footage of a karate tournament appeared on screen, several students glanced back at Amara, who kept her eyes fixed on her notebook. The discipline of traditional martial arts extends beyond physical techniques, the narrator intoned. It is a philosophy of control, respect, and personal growth. As the bell rang and students gathered their things, Amara remained seated, lost in thought. A memory surfaced. Her grandfather's training hall in Atlanta, rain pounding on the roof, as she practiced falling techniques on the mat. Again, Master Elijah had commanded after she'd failed to break her fall properly, resulting in a painful landing. 10-year-old Amara had gritted her teeth and stood, bruises already forming on her shoulder and hip. "It hurts," she'd said. Tears. Threatening. "Pain is a teacher," her grandfather had replied, his voice firm but not unkind. "But only if you listen to what it's telling you. Don't avoid the fall. Control it. Redirect the energy." They had practiced for hours until she could fall from any direction without injury, her body automatically positioning itself to disperse the impact. By the end, she was exhausted, but unafraid of falling. "Remember," Elijah had said as they bowed. "To close the session, mercy is stronger than rage. Anyone can lash out in anger. It takes true strength to show restraint." Amara blinked, returning to the present as Mr. Williams cleared his throat. "Miss Daniels, class is over." "Sorry," she murmured, gathering her books quickly. As she left the classroom, she didn't notice Kyle Murphy watching her with a troubled expression, nor did she see him slip his phone back into his pocket after showing something to Brent. The next day, whispers followed Amara through the hallways with renewed intensity. Students clustered together, heads bent over phones, conversations halting when she passed. "Did you see it? No way that's real. I heard she was like champion or something." During lunch, Maya slid into the seat across from Amara, her expression apologetic. "Someone else saw us at the gym. They must have recorded through another door." Amara's stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" Maya pulled out her phone and showed Amara a short video clip circulating on social media. It was blurry and distant, but unmistakably showed Amara executing a complex bow staff sequence. The caption read, "Ridgefield's secret ninja. What else? Is she hiding?" "I swear it wasn't me," Maya said. "I deleted everything like I promised." Amara's face remained composed, but her knuckles whitened around her water bottle. "It doesn't matter. It kind of does. Everyone's talking about it. They're saying you're some kind of martial arts prodigy." "I'm not," Amara said flatly, though they both knew it was a lie. After school, Amara had just reached her locker when she sensed someone approaching. She turned to find Brent standing there, alone for once, holding several printed pages. "Found some interesting reading," he said, waving the papers. "Did a little research after seeing that video. Elijah Daniels, that's your grandfather, right? The Elijah Daniels?" Amara didn't respond, but her silence was answer enough. 3-time national champion, defeated Masato Tanaka in 1983 in what they called the match of the decade. Started a famous dojo in Atlanta, trained champions. Brent's eyes narrowed. Including his granddaughter, Amara Daniels, junior champion 3 years running before she mysteriously stopped competing. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think you're tough? You're just his shadow. A has-been who couldn't cut it anymore." Amara met his gaze steadily, her face betraying nothing, but her eyes spoke volumes. There was something in them that made Brent take a half step back despite himself. Not fear, exactly, but a depth that unsettled him. Without a word, she turned back to her locker, effectively dismissing him. Brent's face flushed with anger. "This isn't over," he muttered before stalking away. That evening, Amara found her grandfather waiting for her in the backyard. The small practice area he'd created was illuminated by soft lantern light. "You've been exposed," he said without preamble. Amara dropped her backpack on the grass. "Someone recorded me practicing. I'm sorry." Elijah's expression didn't change. Being sorry changes nothing. Being prepared changes everything. He picked up 2 wooden training knives from the small bench. They're pushing you to the edge. You need to master the space between violence and peace. He tossed one knife to Amara, who caught it automatically. We train. For the next 2 hours, they worked on advanced disarming techniques, ways to neutralize an armed opponent without causing serious injury. By the end, Amara was drenched in sweat, her muscles trembling with exhaustion. Again, Elijah commanded. Amara took a deep breath and reset her stance. This wasn't just practice anymore. This was preparation for something they both sensed was coming. Across town, Maya sat on her bed, staring at her phone. A text message from Brent glowed on the screen. Tell me everything you know about the freak. Do this, and I leave you alone. For good. Maya's finger hovered over the keyboard. She thought about how Brent and his friends had made her first year at Ridgefield miserable, spreading rumors after she'd rejected his advances. She thought about the relief of finally being invisible to them. Then she thought about Amara's eyes when she'd said, "You don't want to know who I used to be." With a sigh, she typed, "I don't know anything. Leave me alone." The response came immediately. Wrong answer. One last chance. Maya turned off her phone and stared at the ceiling, wondering when doing the right thing had become so complicated. The next morning, Brent was noticeably absent from homeroom. Rumors circulated that he'd skipped school to attend an elite training camp for a week. He's gotten really intense about working out. Tyler told anyone who would listen. Says he's got something to prove. Kyle Murphy, sitting nearby, frowned but said nothing. He'd seen the way Brent had been obsessively watching fight videos, the maniacal gleam in his eye when he'd said, "I'm going to show everyone who the real champion is." As Kyle watched Amara quietly reading at her desk, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Brent wasn't just a bully anymore, he was becoming something darker, more unstable. And his obsession with humiliating Amara had taken on a disturbing intensity. After class, he approached Amara hesitantly. "Hey," he said, looking uncomfortable. "I just wanted to say, be careful, okay?" Amara looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" Kyle glanced around to ensure no one was listening. "Brent, he's not right. Just watch your back." Before she could respond, he walked away quickly, leaving Amara to ponder this unexpected warning. That evening, as she trained with her grandfather, his words echoed in her mind. "You've trained to protect, but soon, you may need to protect yourself from what they'll become when they can't beat you." The janitor found Amara at 6:30 the next morning, locked inside a supply closet on the second floor. He'd heard the soft, rhythmic sound of movement as he passed by with his cart. "Good Lord. Miss, how long have you been in there?" he exclaimed as he unlocked the door. Amara emerged calmly, her uniform slightly wrinkled but otherwise appearing unaffected. "Since yesterday afternoon. Thank you for letting me out. We should report this. Who did this to you?" "It's fine," Amara said, straightening her blazer. "Is there somewhere I could clean up before class?" The janitor, Mr. Reynolds, led her to the staff bathroom, muttering about kids these days and calling the principal. Amara thanked him again and closed the door. Inside, she splashed water on her face and examined her reflection. She looked tired but composed. When the lock had first clicked behind her yesterday, trapping her in the dark closet, she'd immediately recognized it as a prank. Rather than panicking or shouting, she'd settled into a meditation position on the floor and focused on her breathing. Later, when the school had gone quiet and it became clear no one was coming, she'd use the confined space to practice isometric exercises, pushing against walls, holding stress positions, controlling her breathing in the dusty air. It wasn't the first time she'd been locked somewhere by bullies, though it had been years since the last incident. By the time the first bell rang, Amara had changed into her gym clothes, always kept in her backpack, brushed her teeth with a travel toothbrush, and tied her hair back neatly. Only the shadows under her eyes betrayed her sleepless night. News of the incident spread quickly. By lunch, most students knew that someone had locked Amara in a closet overnight, and that she'd been found calmly doing push-ups when discovered. "That's not normal," a senior girl whispered in the bathroom. "Anyone else would have been freaking out." "I heard she didn't even report who did it," her friend replied. "Like, how is she not furious?" Maya watched these conversations from the periphery, her stomach churning with guilt. She knew who had done it, Tyler and Jordan, acting on Brent's instructions relayed through text messages. Brent himself was still away at his training camp, but his influence remained. During their shared English class, Maya passed Amara a note. "Can we talk after school? It's important." Amara read it, nodded once, then returned to her work. They met at a coffee shop 2 blocks from campus, neutral territory away from prying eyes. "I need to tell you something," Maya said, staring into her untouched latte. "Brent's been pressuring me for information about you. I haven't told him anything, but..." She hesitated, then continued in a rush. "I know he arranged the closet thing, and he's planning something worse." Amara's expression didn't change. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because it's gone too far. And because..." Maya looked up, her eyes troubled. "Because I thought we were becoming friends. Real ones. Are we?" Amara asked quietly. The question hung between them, loaded with implications. Maya looked down again. "I want to be," she finally said. "But I'm scared of Brent. Everyone is." Amara studied her for a long moment. "Fear is a choice," she said eventually. "So is friendship." They sat in silence, the unspoken truth that Maya had been playing both sides lingering between them. Meanwhile, across town, Kyle sat in his bedroom, thumb hovering over the send button on his phone. He'd recorded Brent last week, talking about teaching the freak a lesson she'd never forget. At the time, it had seemed like typical Brent bluster. Now, after the closet incident, he wasn't so sure. A text from Tyler interrupted his thoughts. "Meeting at Brent's tomorrow. Big plans for Friday. Be there or you're out." Kyle stared at the message, a sick feeling settling in his stomach. Things were escalating, and he was running out of time to decide where he stood. The next day, Brent returned to school with a new intensity about him. He'd bulked up noticeably, his movements more aggressive, his eyes constantly tracking Amara through hallways and classrooms. "Dude's been training like a madman," Tyler told a group of admirers at lunch. "You should see him now, like a machine." Amara ignored the whispers, maintaining her routine of quiet studiousness and solitary lunches. Only now, Maya occasionally joined her, their conversations cautious but gradually warming. After school, Amara found her grandfather waiting in the car instead of walking home as usual. "Get in," he said, his expression grim. As they drove, he explained that the school had called about the closet incident. "This has gone beyond childish pranks," he said. "They're testing your limits." "I'm handling it," Amara replied. "Are you?" Elijah's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Or are you simply enduring?" When they arrived home, Elijah led her to the backyard. "It's time to intensify your training." For the next 2 hours, he pushed her harder than he had in years, focusing on scenarios involving multiple attackers in confined spaces. By the end, Amara was breathing hard, her muscles burning. "Again," Elijah commanded. "I know these techniques," Amara protested mildly. "Knowing is not enough. You must embody them so completely that they require no thought." His eyes softened slightly. "I'm not training you to fight. I'm training you to end fights before they begin." Later that evening, Amara sat in her room, applying arnica cream to bruises from training. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Be careful tomorrow. Brent's planning something at gym." Amara stared at the message, then set her phone aside without replying. Whatever was coming, she would face it as she always had, with control and composure. The next day unfolded with an undercurrent of tension. Brent and his friends were conspicuously absent from morning classes, and rumors swirled about what they might be planning. During third period, the PA system crackled to life. "Attention students, Due to a technical issue, all physical education classes will be held in the auditorium today instead of the gymnasium. Maya shot Amara a worried glance from across the classroom. At lunch, Kyle Murphy approached Amara's table, looking nervous. "Can I talk to you? Privately?" Amara nodded, and they stepped outside to the courtyard. "Brent's lost it," Kyle said without preamble. "He's been watching these underground fighting videos nonstop, training with some sketchy guys from Westlake. He's got this idea that he needs to expose you or something." "Why are you telling me this?" Kyle looked away. "Because I've been recording him. The things he's been saying. It's not right. He's talking about hurting you for real, not just pranks anymore." Amara absorbed this information silently. "Thank you for warning me." "That's not all," Kyle continued. "He's made some kind of deepfake video. Shows you attacking some kid from another school. He's planning to release it anonymously to get you expelled." Amara's composure faltered for just a moment. "When?" "Today. After school. He's waiting for the right moment." As Kyle walked away, Maya approached, having watched the exchange from a distance. "What did he say?" "Nothing I didn't already suspect," Amara replied. "But thank you for your warning too." Maya flushed with shame. "I should have told you sooner. About everything." "We all make choices," Amara said simply. The afternoon dragged on, the tension building with each passing hour. In her final class, Amara received a note passed through several students. "Check your email." Opening her school email account on her phone, she found a message from an anonymous address containing only a video file. She didn't need to watch it to know what it contained. As the final bell rang, Vice Principal Turner's voice came over the PA system. "Amara Daniels, please report to the main office immediately." Students whispered and pointed as Amara gathered her things calmly and walked to the office. Inside, Vice Principal Turner and Principal Reynolds waited with grave expressions. "Miss Daniels," Principal Reynolds began, "we've received a very disturbing video that appears to show you assaulting another student. While the student is not from our school, this kind of violent behavior is grounds for immediate suspension pending further investigation." Amara didn't protest, didn't try to explain that the video was fake. She simply nodded and accepted the suspension notice. As she left the office, she found Maya waiting in the hallway, tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry. This is all my fault." "No," Amara said firmly. "This is Brent's choice. His action." Outside, her grandfather waited in the car, his expression thunderous as she explained the situation. "This is unacceptable," Elijah said as they drove home. "I'm pulling you out permanently. We'll find another school somewhere far from here." "No." Amara's voice was quiet but firm. "No." Elijah glanced at her, surprised by the defiance. "I'm not running anymore," she said. "I left Atlanta because I was scared. I'm not scared now. This isn't about fear, it's about wisdom, knowing when to walk away. You taught me never to back down from a worthy challenge. This isn't worthy. These are children playing dangerous games. Then I need to end the game, on my terms." They rode in tense silence the rest of the way home. As they pulled into the driveway, Elijah said, "This discussion isn't over." "I know," Amara replied, "but my decision is." That night, Amara slipped out of the house and made her way to the school gym. She needed space to think, to move, to process the anger she'd been suppressing for weeks. The side door was still unlocked as always. Inside, the empty gym echoed with her footsteps as she approached the punching bag hanging in the corner. Without wrapping her hands, she began striking the bag. Slowly at first, then with increasing speed and force. All the control she'd maintained, all the restraint she'd practiced, she channeled it into each perfect strike. The bag swung wildly as her punches and kicks grew more intense. Sweat dripped down her face, but she didn't slow down. When her knuckles began to bleed, she still didn't stop. Finally, with a powerful roundhouse kick, she sent the bag flying off its chain, splitting the seam as it hit the floor. Sand spilled across the polished wood as Amara stood breathing heavily, her hands shaking. "Feel better?" She turned to find her grandfather standing in the doorway. He approached silently, and took her bleeding hands in his, examining the damage. "You could have broken them," he said, his voice neutral as he began bandaging her knuckles with supplies from his pocket. "I know," she replied. "Then why?" Amara looked at the fallen bag, then back at her grandfather. "Because I needed to remember what it feels like to lose control." Elijah finished bandaging her hands in silence. When he spoke again, his voice was gentle. "The path you've chosen is difficult, but I will walk it with you." Across town, Maya lay in bed staring at her ceiling. Her phone buzzed with a text from Brent. "Good work today. One more thing I need you to do." Maya read the message, then deleted it without responding. Tears slid down her face as she thought about the quiet girl who had shown her nothing but dignity, even after Maya's betrayal. Her phone buzzed again. "Get her to the gym. One last dance." Maya's heart raced with sudden panic. Brent wasn't finished. This was only the beginning. At the same time, Kyle sat in his bedroom, reviewing the recordings he'd made over the past week. Brent and two friends, planning something, at the gym. Something they called the ultimate humiliation. His finger hovered over the delete button. Then, with sudden resolve, he saved the files to a secure folder. Whatever happened next, he wanted evidence, just in case. Meanwhile, at Amara's house, Elijah sat on the edge of her bed as she finally fell into exhausted sleep. He gently adjusted the blanket over her shoulders, then spoke softly. "Only use your strength when silence fails. You're a warrior, not a weapon." In her sleep, Amara's bandaged hands tightened into fists, then slowly relaxed as dawn began to break over Ridgefield. 3 days into her suspension, Amara sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, meditating. The scabs on her knuckles were healing well. A soft knock interrupted her concentration. "Come in," she called, opening her eyes. Maya stood hesitantly in the doorway, clutching her backpack. "Your mom let me in." Amara nodded and gestured for Maya to sit. "How did you know where I live?" "School directory," Maya admitted, lowering herself to the floor. "I needed to talk. To you in person." "There's a senior event Friday night," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A private dance in the gym before the actual prom next week. Students only, no teachers." Amara's expression remained neutral. "And?" "Brent wants me to convince you to come." Maya pulled out her phone and showed Amara a series of threatening texts. "He says if I don't get you there, he'll make sure everyone knows I was helping him all along." "You were," Amara pointed out, her voice free of judgment. Maya flinched. "I know. I was scared and stupid, but this is different. He's planning something big, something public. I think he wants to humiliate you in front of everyone." "Okay," Amara said finally. "Okay, what?" "I'll go to the dance." Maya's eyes widened. "What? No, that's not why I came here. I came to warn you to stay away." "I know," Amara said, rising to her feet in one fluid motion. "But this needs to end." After Maya left, Amara found her grandfather in the garden, pruning his bonsai trees with meticulous care. "There's a school dance Friday night," she said without preamble. "I'm going." Elijah's hands paused, scissors hovering over a small branch. "You're suspended. It's an unofficial event, students only." Elijah studied her face. "The boy who threatened you will be there." "Yes." "And you believe he plans to escalate the situation?" "Yes." Elijah resumed his pruning, snipping a tiny branch, with surgical precision. "Then why would you attend?" "Because he won't stop until I face him." The old man sighed deeply, setting down his scissors. "This is not the path I would choose for you." "I know," Amara said, "but it's the path in front of me." Elijah reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden pendant on a leather cord. The wood was dark with age, polished by years of handling, carved with a symbol that resembled a stylized wave. "This belonged to my teacher," he said, placing it in Amara's palm. "He gave it to me when I faced my own impossible challenge. It represents the principle of yielding, of using an opponent's force against them rather than opposing it directly. If anything happens," Elijah continued, his voice grave, "don't lose yourself. Remember who you are and what you stand for." Friday evening arrived with an air of inevitability. Amara stood in front of her mirror, the blue dress falling simply around her knees. The wooden pendant hung around her neck, nestled against her collarbone. "You look beautiful," her mother said from the doorway. "First dance at the new school?" Amara nodded, not correcting her mother's assumption that this was a normal school event. The gymnasium had been transformed with string lights and crepe paper decorations. Music blared from speakers set up on the basketball court, which had been repurposed as a dance floor. About 50 students milled around dressed in semi-formal attire. Amara spotted Maya sitting alone on the bleachers looking tense. Brent was nowhere to be seen. "Brent's not here yet," Maya whispered as Amara joined her. "But Tyler and Jordan are by the punch bowl, and they keep checking their phones." As they spoke, the music suddenly cut out mid-song. The overhead lights dimmed, leaving only the string lights illuminating the space. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. A spotlight clicked on, its beam finding Amara on the bleachers. She didn't flinch as the harsh light hit her face, merely rose to her feet with calm dignity. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brent's voice boomed from the speakers. "Tonight we have a special guest, Ridgefield Academy's very own ninja freak." The gym doors opened, and Brent strode in, followed by 6 of his friends. He held a phone mounted on a stabilizing gimbal, clearly set to livestream. His body had changed during his absence. He'd put on noticeable muscle mass, and his movements had a new aggressive edge. The crowd parted as he approached Amara, who remained perfectly still in the spotlight. Students began to form a loose circle, sensing a confrontation brewing. "Let's see what the ninja freak can do," Brent announced to his phone camera. "Tonight we find out if she's really as tough as her reputation." Maya stood up beside Amara. "This is wrong, Brent. Stop it now." "Sit down, traitor," he snapped. "Everyone knows you've been playing both sides." Brent approached Amara, invading her personal space. "One shot, freak. Show us what you got." Amara remained motionless, her face impassive. The pendant seemed to warm against her skin. "What's wrong?" "Scared?" Brent taunted, shoving her shoulder lightly. No response. He shoved harder. "Come on, Karate Kid. Show us those moves." "You think you're special because your grandpa was some washed-up fighter?" Brent's voice rose as his frustration mounted. "Your kind doesn't belong here. Never did." Around them, some students began to look uncomfortable. This wasn't the entertaining confrontation they'd expected. It was becoming ugly, one-sided harassment. "Fight back," Brent demanded, shoving her again. "She's not going to fight you, man," Kyle called from the edge of the circle. "Just let it go." "Shut up," Brent snarled, not taking his eyes off Amara. "Tyler, show her we're serious." One of Brent's friends lunged at Amara from the side. In a movement so subtle it was barely perceptible, she shifted her weight and redirected his momentum, causing him to stumble past her without making contact. The crowd murmured. Tyler looked confused, not entirely sure what had happened. "Jordan, your turn," Brent commanded. Another boy approached more cautiously, throwing a half-hearted punch toward Amara's midsection. Again, she moved just enough to avoid the strike, without seeming to exert herself. Jordan threw another punch, and another, each one missing as Amara seemed to flow around his attacks like water around stones. "She's not even hitting back," someone in the crowd observed. "She's just not getting hit." Sensing he was losing control of the situation, Brent made a desperate move. He grabbed Maya's arm and yanked her into the circle. "Let's see if you'll just stand there while I teach your friend a lesson," he threatened, raising his hand as if to strike Maya. Something flickered in Amara's eyes, the first real emotion she'd shown since the confrontation began. In a blur of movement too fast for most to follow, she crossed the space between them. Her hand caught Brent's wrist in midair. In one fluid sequence, she redirected his momentum, twisted his arm behind his back, and applied precise pressure to a nerve point that sent him to his knees. The entire maneuver took less than 2 seconds and used Brent's own force against him. Blood trickled from his nose, not from a strike but from hitting the floor when his legs gave out. The gym fell completely silent. "The stream," Maya whispered urgently. "It's still going." Indeed, Brent's phone lay on the floor, still broadcasting everything to an unseen audience. As if on cue, Distant sirens wailed in the night. Someone called. "The cops," a voice said from the back of the crowd. Panic erupted as students began rushing for the exits. In the chaos, Brent struggled to his feet, blood still dripping from his nose. "You're finished," he spat at Amara. "Assaulting a student. On live stream, you're done at this school." "No, she's not," Kyle said, stepping forward with his own phone held high. "I've got everything, Brent. The planning sessions, the threats, all of it. Plus this live stream shows she only defended herself and Maya after you threatened to hit a girl." The sirens grew louder as police cars pulled up outside the gym. Brent looked around wildly, seeing former supporters melting away, leaving him increasingly isolated. As officers entered the gym, the remaining students scattered, leaving only Amara, Maya, Kyle, and Brent in the center of the floor. Later that night, Amara sat silently in the passenger seat as Elijah drove her home from the police station. After reviewing Kyle's videos and witness statements, the officers had released Amara without charges. Brent, however, was being held pending a juvenile hearing for orchestrating the incident. Sitting on the edge of her bed, she took off the pendant and held it in her palm. In the moonlight filtering through her window, the carved symbol seemed to glow with a faint inner light. She had maintained control, had used only what force was necessary, exactly as her grandfather had taught her. Yet she felt no satisfaction, no sense of victory, only a deep weariness and the knowledge that while one battle might be over, the war was far from won. Monday morning brought official notice from Ridgefield Academy. Despite video evidence clearing Amara of aggression, she was suspended for an additional week for contributing to a violent atmosphere on school grounds. Brent had been expelled, along with Tyler and Jordan. The town buzzed with conflicting versions of what had happened at the dance. "This is absurd," Elijah fumed, pacing the living room after reading the letter. "You defended yourself and another student. That boy was clearly the aggressor." "It doesn't matter," Amara said from the couch, her voice tired. "The school needs to show they're being fair by punishing everyone involved." Later that afternoon, the doorbell rang. Amara opened, it to find Maya standing on the porch looking nervous. "Can we talk?" Maya asked. Amara led her to the backyard where they sat on the stone bench near Elijah's Zen garden. For several minutes, neither spoke. "I need to tell you everything," Maya finally said, her voice thick with emotion. "From the beginning, Brent pressured me to get close to you, to find out things he could use against you. I was scared of him, of what he might do if I refused. So I agreed." She paused, wiping her eyes. "But then I actually got to know you, and I realized what a terrible person I was being. By then it felt too late to come clean. I kept thinking I could somehow protect you without Brent finding out I'd switched sides." "A difficult position," Amara observed, her voice neutral. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Maya said quickly. "I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know the whole truth." Amara studied Maya's face, seeing the genuine remorse there. After a long moment, she asked quietly, "Do you want forgiveness or peace?" The question hung between them, weighted with meaning. "I don't understand," Maya whispered. "Forgiveness is something I can give you," Amara explained. "Peace is something you have to find within yourself." That evening, Amara sat with her grandfather on the back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The events of recent weeks had cast a shadow over her, bringing back memories she'd tried to leave behind in Atlanta. "I never told you why we left," she said suddenly. Elijah turned to her, waiting patiently for her to continue. "There was a boy at my old school, Jackson. He targeted me from the first day, always trying to provoke me into fighting. One day, he and his friends cornered me in the locker room." Amara paused, her eyes distant. "I was scared. I forgot everything you taught me about control. I just reacted. 3 of them ended up in the hospital." "I know," Elijah said softly. "Your mother told me. After that, everyone was afraid of me. The crazy girl who put 3 boys in the hospital. No one cared that they had attacked me. First," Elijah nodded slowly. "And you feared the same would happen here if you defended yourself?" "Yes. That's why I tried so hard not to react, not to fight back. I thought if I just endured it long enough, they'd get bored and move on. But this boy, Brent, he wouldn't stop pushing. No, he needed to prove something, to himself, to everyone watching. My restraint just made him push harder. Elijah placed a weathered hand on Amara's shoulder. In my lifetime, I have stood in many storms. Some I weathered by bending, others by standing firm. There is no single right way to face adversity. What if I made the wrong choice? What if I should have left when you suggested it? The path of wisdom is rarely clear until we look back upon it, Elijah said. You stood your ground. You protected another when silence failed. I am proud of the choice you made. The following days brought unexpected developments. Local news outlets picked up the story of the dance incident, with headlines ranging from martial arts beatdown at Ridgefield Academy to bullying escalates to violence at local school. Parents formed opposing factions, some praising Amara's restraint in the face of provocation, others claiming she represented a danger to their children simply by being trained in martial arts. It's ridiculous, Amara's mother fumed over breakfast, reading the latest online comments. They're acting like you're some kind of weapon, not a 17-year-old girl who defended herself. People fear what they don't understand, Elijah remarked calmly. And many do not understand the true purpose of martial arts training. The doorbell rang, interrupting their discussion. Amara opened the door to find Elijah standing there, a small suitcase in hand. I've been thinking, he said. Without preamble, perhaps it would be better to leave Ridgefield after all. Start over somewhere new. I have connections in California, a friend who runs a respected dojo where you could train and teach. Amara considered the offer. Just weeks ago, she might have jumped at the chance to escape. Now, the thought of running away again left a bitter taste in her mouth. No, she said firmly. You taught me to stand. I'm not running again. A ghost of a smile touched Elijah's lips. Then stand taller. That afternoon, Maya texted Amara a link to a new video posted online. Kyle had created a montage of Brent's worst behavior over the past months, intercut with footage of Amara training, alone in the gym after hours. The video ended with a simple message. This is who she really is. The comment section overflowed with support from students who had witnessed Brent's bullying but had been too afraid to speak out. The tide of public opinion was beginning to turn. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to the Daniels home. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a determined expression introduced herself as Patricia Thompson, Maya's mother, but also the parent of a sophomore with cerebral palsy. My son Ethan told me something I think you should hear, she said, accepting the offered seat in the living room. A few weeks ago, some boys were mocking his gait in the hallway. Your daughter intervened, not by confronting them, but by walking beside Ethan all the way to his next class, effectively shielding him from their taunts. Amara looked surprised. I didn't do anything special. I just walked with him. To you, perhaps it wasn't special. To Ethan, it meant everything. Mrs. Thompson leaned forward earnestly. I've requested to speak at tomorrow's PTA meeting. They're discussing your situation, and I want to make sure they hear another perspective. After Mrs. Thompson left, Amara found herself facing a new kind of attention. Students she barely knew began reaching out with messages of support. Teachers sent emails expressing regret for not intervening sooner. Most surprising was Maya's latest project, a school blog called Silent Warriors, highlighting students who faced adversity with dignity. Her first post featured an anonymous profile of a student with a disability navigating Ridgefield's social hierarchy. The piece was thoughtful, nuanced, and clearly inspired by Amara's approach to conflict. Would you write something? Maya asked, during one of her now daily visits to Amara's house. About your grandfather's teachings, maybe? People should understand what martial arts is really about. Amara hesitated, unused to sharing the private philosophies that had guided her training. Then slowly she nodded. I'll try. Over the next few days, Amara poured herself into writing an essay titled The Path of Peace. She wrote about her grandfather's teachings, about the discipline of restraint, about finding strength in stillness. She wrote about the years of training that had taught her not how to fight, but how to avoid fighting whenever possible. When the essay was complete, Maya published it on the blog with Amara's permission. Within hours, it had been shared hundreds of times across student social media accounts. Comments poured in from students and parents alike, many expressing surprise at the thoughtfulness behind the martial discipline they had misunderstood. Day before Amara's suspension was set to end, she received an email requesting her presence at the principal's office the following morning. "They can't expel you now," Maya insisted when Amara told her about the email. "Not with all the support you have." "We'll see," Amara replied, maintaining her characteristic caution. The next morning, Amara and her grandfather arrived at Principal Reynolds' office to find not just the principal, but also the school counselor and the PE teacher, Ms. Jackson. "Thank you for coming," Principal Reynolds began, his expression serious but not unkind. "We've been re-evaluating the events of the past few weeks in light of new information and community feedback." He cleared his throat. "The school board has decided to lift your suspension immediately, with a formal apology for how the situation was handled. Ms. Jackson has made an interesting proposal," he continued, nodding to the PE teacher. "She believes your skills and philosophy could benefit other students, particularly younger girls who struggle with confidence and self-defense awareness." Ms. Jackson leaned forward. "We'd like you to help lead a weekly self-defense workshop for middle school girls, completely voluntary, of course, and with proper supervision." Amara glanced at her grandfather, whose expression remained neutral, though his eyes showed surprise. "I would need to consider it," she said carefully. "Of course," Principal Reynolds agreed. "Take some time to think it over." The following week, Amara entered the gym during lunch period. Ms. Jackson had arranged for her to see the space where the workshops would be held, if she agreed to the proposal. The gym was empty, except for a few mats laid out in the center of the floor. Amara walked to the middle of the space and stood silently, remembering the night of the dance, the confrontation, the moment when silence had no longer been an option. Slowly, deliberately, she removed her shoes and stepped onto the mat. Then, facing the empty room, she bowed deeply, not in submission, but in respect for the journey that had brought her here and the path that lay ahead. 2 weeks after Amara began leading the self-defense workshops, Ridgefield Academy's atmosphere had shifted noticeably. The girls who attended her sessions walked with new confidence, their shoulders straighter, their voices stronger. Parents reported positive changes at home. Daughters who were more assertive, more self-assured, less anxious about school. Despite this success, tension lingered just beneath the surface of the community. At a town hall meeting about school safety, several parents expressed concerns about Amara's role. "I understand she's teaching self-defense," said Michael Peters, a local business owner, making air quotes with his fingers. "But aren't we essentially endorsing violence as a solution? This girl put a student in the hospital." Principal Reynolds attempted to correct the record. Ms. Daniels defended herself and another student from a coordinated attack that was live-streamed. At no point did she initiate physical contact, and the only injury sustained was a nosebleed from a fall. "That's not the point," another parent interjected. "The point is that we have a trained fighter teaching our children techniques that could be dangerous." From the back of the room, Amara rose to her feet. The crowd fell silent as she made her way to the microphone. She had not planned to speak, but the mischaracterization of her work could not go unchallenged. "My name is Amara Daniels," she began, her voice calm but carrying to every corner of the room. "I've been training in traditional karate since I was 5 years old. In those 12 years, I've learned that true martial arts is not about fighting. It's about preventing fights." She paused, looking around the room at the mixture of supportive and skeptical faces. "Every session begins with the same principle. We practice awareness first, avoidance second, and physical techniques only as a last resort. The first 3 classes don't involve any strikes at all, just how to recognize dangerous situations, how to de-escalate conflict, and how to create distance when necessary." Her voice gained strength as she continued. "Peace is not weakness, and control is not submission. I stood still when I could have broken bones. I chose restraint when provoked. That's what I'm teaching your daughters. Not how to hurt others, but how to protect themselves while causing minimal harm. As she returned to her seat, a ripple of applause spread through one section of the audience. Other parents exchanged thoughtful glances. It was the first time many had heard Amara speak at length, and her poise and wisdom belied her 17 years. Later that evening, as Amara and her grandfather practiced kata in their backyard, she recalled a moment from her childhood training. She had been 8 years old, standing before her grandfather and his senior students reciting the oath he had taught her. "I will use my hands for protection, never for aggression," young Amara had declared, her small voice solemn. "I will seek peace before conflict, respect before victory, and leave no scars when peace fails." The other students had watched with approval as Master Elijah placed a white headband on his granddaughter's forehead, the symbol of her first formal rank. "This is the oath of balance," he had told the gathering. "A personal code passed down through our family for 3 generations. Now, as they completed their practice, Elijah nodded with approval. "You spoke well today. You are becoming a teacher in your own right." Before Amara could respond, her mother called from the house. "Amara, there's something you should see." Inside, the local news was playing a segment about the town hall meeting. After showing a clip of Amara's speech, the anchor turned to a new development. In a surprise twist, the father of expelled student Brent Keller has filed a civil lawsuit against Elijah Daniels and his granddaughter Amara, claiming emotional distress and damage to his son's reputation and future prospects. Amara felt her stomach drop as the screen showed Richard Keller, a tall man in an expensive suit, standing on the courthouse steps. "My son made mistakes, as teenagers do, but the response was disproportionate and has caused lasting trauma. We're seeking damages and a formal recognition that the Daniels martial arts background constitutes a threat to student safety." Elijah turned off the television, his face impassive. "An interesting strategy," he remarked. Unable to win physically, they turned to the courts. "What do we do?" Amara asked, struggling to maintain her composure. "We continue on our path," Elijah replied simply. "Truth does not fear scrutiny." The next morning, Amara arrived at school to find students clustered around their phones, discussing the lawsuit. Some avoided her gaze, while others offered supportive smiles or words of encouragement. Maya met her at her locker, looking worried. "Have you seen social media? The Kellers are trying to paint you as some kind of dangerous weapon. They're saying, your grandfather has been training you for violence since you were a child." Amara placed her books in her locker with deliberate calm. "That's partially true. He has been training me since I was a child, to avoid violence whenever possible." "We need to fight back," Maya insisted. "The Silent Warriors blog has a good following now. We could do a series on what martial arts really teaches." "Perhaps," Amara conceded, "but not in anger or defensiveness. If we respond, it should be from a place of strength and truth." As they walked to class, Kyle approached them, looking nervous but determined. "Amara, I need to talk to you." He led them to a quiet corner of the courtyard. "My dad's a lawyer. He says the Kellers' case is weak, but they have money and influence. They could drag this out for months, maybe years." Amara nodded, unsurprised. Richard Keller was one of the largest contractors in the county, with political connections and deep pockets. "But here's the thing," Kyle continued, lowering his voice. "I've been talking to some of Brent's former victims, not just you. There have been others over the years. If enough people came forward with stories about his pattern of behavior, it could change the narrative completely." "I won't ask people to expose themselves to retaliation," Amara said firmly. "You don't have to," Kyle replied. "I already have 5 students willing to give sworn statements about Brent's bullying, and I've been in touch with students from his old school before Ridgefield." Maya's eyes widened. "There were others before here?" Apparently, the Kellers changed schools twice before coming to Ridgefield, each time after incidents involving Brent. That afternoon, as Amara was preparing for her self-defense workshop, she received an unexpected visitor. A tall black man in his 50s entered the gym, his presence commanding respect without effort. "Ms. Daniels, I'm James Thompson, Maya's older brother." He extended his hand. "I understand you're having some legal trouble." Amara shook his hand, noting his firm grip and direct gaze. "Mr. Thompson, please call me James. I'm a civil rights attorney with the Justice Coalition. I've been following your situation with interest." He gestured to the bleachers. "Do you have a moment to talk?" As they sat, James explained his perspective. "This isn't just about a fight in a gym. This is about prejudice wearing a suit and tie. The Kellers are using their privilege and financial resources to intimidate a young black woman who stood her ground against harassment." Amara listened carefully, considering his words. "What are you suggesting?" "I'd like to represent you and your grandfather pro bono. My firm specializes in cases like yours, where systems designed to protect everyone are being manipulated, to protect only the powerful." "Why would you do this for us?" Amara asked. "You don't know me." James smiled slightly. "My nephew Ethan told me how you walked him to class when others were mocking him. My sister told me about your essay on peace, and I've seen the video of how you handled that confrontation at the dance." He leaned forward. "People like you, who have power but choose restraint, those are the people worth fighting for." Over the next few days, the lawsuit drew increasing media attention. As James had predicted, it became about more than just the incident at the dance. It became a focal point for broader discussions about bullying, race, school discipline, and self-defense. Supporters and critics gathered outside the school, holding signs and chanting slogans. Local news vans became a regular fixture in the parking lot. Social media exploded with hashtags both supporting and condemning Amara. Through it all, she maintained her routines, attending classes, leading workshops, training with her grandfather. But the constant scrutiny wore on her. For the first time since arriving in Ridgefield, she began to question whether staying had been the right decision. One evening, as she walked home from the library, she noticed a car following her slowly. When it pulled alongside her, she tensed, prepared for confrontation. The window rolled down, revealing a woman in her 40s with a professional smile. "Amara Daniels? I'm Diane Fletcher from Westridge Academy for Girls. We've been following your story with great interest." She handed Amara a business card. "Our board would like to offer you a full scholarship to complete your senior year at Westridge, starting immediately." Amara took the card silently. "We have an excellent martial arts program," Diane continued, "and we value students who demonstrate the kind of character you've shown under pressure." "Why now?" Amara asked. Diane's smile faltered slightly. "I'm not sure I understand." "Why offer me a scholarship now in the middle of a controversial lawsuit? We believe in your potential regardless of current circumstances." Amara handed the card back. "Thank you, but if your offer is contingent on me leaving quietly, I'm not interested." "That's not what Diane began, but Amara had already turned and continued walking. When she arrived home, she found her grandfather sitting beneath the cherry tree in the backyard, the tree he had planted when she was born. Its branches swayed gently in the evening breeze, casting dappled shadows across his weathered face. "You seem troubled," he observed as she sat beside him. Amara told him about the scholarship offer. "They want me to disappear, to solve everyone's problem by leaving." Elijah was silent for a long moment. Then, he untied the black belt from his waist, the one he had worn for over 40 years, and held it in his hands. The fabric was worn smooth from decades of use, its edges frayed but its strength undiminished. "When I earned this belt, my teacher told me something I have never forgotten," he said, his voice soft with memory. He said, "This is not a symbol of what you know, but of what you have overcome. Each thread represents a challenge faced with dignity." He placed the belt in Amara's hands. "Whatever choice you make it with honor. If you stay, fight with truth. If you go with your head high. But know that I am proud of you, regardless of your decision." Amara ran her fingers over the worn fabric, feeling its history, its significance. Her decision crystallized in that moment, clear and certain. I don't need to escape to prove I belong, she said firmly. I want to build something better. Here. The next day, Amara walked into the gym where a special assembly had been called to address the ongoing situation. The bleachers were filled with students, teachers, and parents. Principal Reynolds stood at center court with a microphone, looking nervous. As Amara made her way to the front, the crowd fell silent. She was dressed in her formal karate gi, her grandfather's black belt tied around her waist, a stark visual reminder of her heritage and training. When she reached the center of the gym, she bowed deeply to the assembly, a gesture of respect that surprised many who didn't understand its significance. Principal Reynolds stepped aside, handing her the microphone without a word. This moment belonged to her. As she straightened from her bow and faced the crowd, Amara felt a strange sense of calm. Whatever happened next, she had chosen her path with honor. 1 year later, cherry blossoms drifted on the spring breeze as Amara walked confidently through the halls of Ridgefield Academy. The school had transformed in subtle but significant ways since the events of the previous year. A framed copy of her essay, The Path of Peace, hung in the main office alongside other student achievements. Anti-bullying posters adorned the walls, many featuring quotes about restraint and respect. Amara herself had changed too. Now a senior preparing for graduation, she carried herself with quiet confidence, no longer trying to be invisible. Students greeted her warmly as she passed, not with the wary respect of before, but with genuine friendliness. In the media center, a small crowd had gathered for the screening of Maya's documentary, She Stood Still. The 15-minute film chronicled Amara's experience and the subsequent changes at Ridgefield Academy, ending with a powerful slow-motion sequence of Amara training, overlaid with her narration from The Path of Peace. As the lights came up after the screening, Principal Reynolds stepped forward. I'm pleased to announce that Maya's documentary has been selected for the Regional Youth Film Festival, and more importantly, our school's anti-bullying initiative, inspired by these events, has been recognized by the State Board of Education as a model program. Applause filled the room. Maya, blushing with pride, hugged Amara. I couldn't have done it without you, she whispered. You found your voice, Amara replied. I just gave you something to talk about. After school, Amara drove to the community center that had opened on the edge of town 6 months earlier. Balance House, read the simple sign above the entrance. Inside, children of various ages practiced on the training mats, supervised by Master Elijah and several assistant instructors. The center had been Amara's idea, funded by a combination of community donations and, ironically, part of the settlement from the Keller lawsuit. Richard Keller had withdrawn his suit after James Thompson's discovery process had unearthed, documented, incidents of Brent's bullying at 3 previous schools. The resulting agreement included funding for anti-bullying initiatives, including Balance House, which offered free self-defense classes to underserved communities. Amara changed into her GI and joined the advanced class, where she found Kyle Murphy already warming up. He had become one of her most dedicated students and now served as her assistant coach for the beginners classes. How was the documentary screening? He asked as they stretched. Good. Maya has a real talent for storytelling. Kyle nodded, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. It's weird to think about how different things were a year ago. I was such a coward, just going along with whatever Brent wanted. You made better choices when it mattered, Amara reminded him. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Master Elijah, who called the class to order. As they bowed to begin training, Amara caught sight of a letter lying on her grandfather's desk, the Ridgefield Academy letterhead visible from where she stood. After class, while the other students were changing, Amara picked up the letter. It was addressed to her grandfather, thanking him for his guest lecture on conflict resolution for the Faculty Development Day. The final paragraph caught her attention. We've also received the letter from Brent Keller. While we cannot share its contents without his permission, we wanted you to know that it has been forwarded to Amara as requested. The behavioral correction program appears to be having a positive impact. That evening, when Amara checked her school email, she found a message from an unfamiliar address with the subject line, "From Brent." She hesitated before opening it, unsure of what to expect. The message was brief and strangely impersonal, as if Brent had written it as an assignment rather than from genuine remorse. Amara, I'm required to write this as part of my program. I'm supposed to apologize for my actions, but I don't really understand why you never fought back until the end. You could have beaten me easily from the beginning. Why let it go so far? It doesn't make sense to me. Brent. Amara stared at the screen for a long moment, then closed the email without responding. Some lessons couldn't be taught through words alone. The following weekend brought unexpected recognition. A local journalist who had covered the lawsuit had submitted her story to a national competition, where it won first place in youth reporting. The piece, titled "Standing Still: How One Student's Restraint Changed a School Culture," was being reprinted in major newspapers across the country. Amara's phone rang constantly with interview requests from podcasts, websites, and even television shows. With her grandfather's guidance, she accepted one invitation: to speak at a youth leadership summit in Atlanta, where their journey had begun. On the day of the summit, Amara stood backstage, reviewing her notes one last time. The auditorium was filled with hundreds of teenagers from across the country, all gathered to learn about effective leadership and conflict resolution. When her name was announced, she walked onto the stage with measured steps. Her grandfather's black belt now worn with the confidence of one who had earned it twice over, once through training, and once through living its principles. "Courage isn't about being loud," she began, her voice clear and steady. "It's about choosing peace in a world that rewards violence. It's about standing still when everything within you screams to run or fight." As she spoke, she noticed familiar faces in the audience. Maya and her family had traveled to support her, along with Kyle and several other students from Ridgefield. Even Principal Reynolds sat in the back row, nodding as she described the transformation that had taken place at their school. After the talk, as applause filled the auditorium, Amara felt a sense of completion. The circle that had begun with her grandfather's teachings had expanded to include hundreds, perhaps thousands, who would carry these principles into their own lives. Back at Balance House, a new tradition had taken root. On the back wall of the dojo, students and visitors were invited to press their painted hands against a blank canvas, creating a vibrant mosaic of overlapping prints in all sizes and colors. The Wall of Impact, they called it, a visual representation of how one person's influence could spread to many. On the day before graduation, Elijah added his handprint to the wall, placing it beside Amara's. As the red paint dried, he stepped back to observe their marks side by side, his large and weathered, hers smaller but equally strong. "You didn't just learn the way," he said softly, his eyes glistening with uncharacteristic emotion. "You lit it for others." Graduation day arrived with perfect weather, sunshine and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and possibility. As Amara prepared to join her classmates for the ceremony, she paused to look at herself in the mirror. The girl who had arrived in Ridgefield less than 2 years ago, guarded, isolated, afraid of her own power, seemed like a stranger now. After receiving her diploma to enthusiastic applause, Amara joined her mother and grandfather for photos. As the photographer prepared to capture the moment, she noticed Elijah subtly adjusting his posture, straightening his spine, lifting his chin, small gestures that spoke volumes about pride and legacy. That evening, Amara returned to the dojo alone. The space was quiet, the mats freshly cleaned, the walls echoing with memories of countless hours of practice. She moved to the center of the training floor and began a kata, not one of the formal sequences she had learned, but a personal form that had evolved from her experiences. Each movement told part of her story: the patience of endurance, the fluidity of adaptation, the precision of response, the power of restraint. As she completed the sequence, she imagined the students who would train here in the years to come, learning these same principles. The following Monday, Amara led her first class as a full instructor at Balance House. The gym was filled with young students, their faces bright with anticipation and respect as they watched her demonstrate techniques they would learn. As she bowed to the class to begin the session, she heard her own voice in her mind, echoing the words she had written months ago. When they pushed me to break, I learned to bend. When they told me to leave, I chose to lead. And when silence became a cage, I used it to find my strength. Looking at the faces before her, eager, trusting, ready to learn, Amara knew that her grandfather's legacy would continue through her and beyond her to each student who carried these teachings into the world. The cycle of wisdom would continue, flowing like water around obstacles, powerful not in its force but in its persistence. She smiled, a rare full smile that transformed her serious face, and began to teach. What would you have done if silence became your prison and peace your rebellion? Like and subscribe for more stories that challenge your perceptions of strength and explore the quiet power within us all.